Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about mollusks. Okay, so what is a mollusk? So you should have got a pretty good idea from the video. Mollusks are soft-bodied animals. They have an internal or external shell. So most of them have a shell of some sort. Shell, no shell. Of course, there's always exceptions. Shell, a bit of a shell inside, no shell. So this particular group, this phylum, includes animals like snails and slugs and clams and squid and octopi. These are all mollusks. So we already kind of talked about this, but just to remind you, annelids, or the segmented worms like earthworms and their relatives, and mollusks are related. So why do biologists believe this? Well, because of the trochophore larvae. So this microscopic, weird-looking thing, kind of like spaceship-looking thing, is found in both the annelids and the mollusks. So it's thought that they have a common ancestor pretty close. All mollusks have a true coelom. So we mentioned that the annelids or the earthworms and their relatives have a true coelom. So all the animals we're going to see from here on out after the annelids have a true coelom. So mollusks have a true coelom. And like the annelids, or the segmented worms, they also have a lot of complex organ systems which kind of work together. So this is sort of, we're going to see, as time goes on, these body systems get more and more complex. Now, excuse me. As far as the body plan goes, of course we see a lot of different shapes and sort of body shapes with the mollusks, but they all kind of have the same basic body plan, and that is they have the four parts. They have the foot, which is used for movement. Again, that foot can take many different shapes. They have a mantle. The mantle is what secretes the shell. Most of them have a shell, and of course the shell helps to protect them. And they'll have a visceral mass, or some area that contains most of the organs. Now here in the background, I included this because you may have seen this before. This is called mother of pearl, and this is found on the inside of many different types of shells. And again, this is secreted by the mantle. So this mother of pearl is often used in buttons and other things. I know for guitars, on the necks, the fret markers are often made out of this mother of pearl. Pearls themselves are actually made from the mantle. Right? So something gets, a piece of sand or something gets in between the mantle and the shell, and it irritates it, and it will cover it up with these layers of mother of pearl until it becomes an actual pearl. So here we're looking at diagrams of three different things. We have the snail, we have the squid, and we have the clam. Again, they have all four things. They just look quite a bit different. So here the snail, here of course the foot is on the bottom. It uses that for moving along. Of course the snail shell, you've all seen that. The visceral mass would be inside the snail shell. That's got all the guts, so to speak. And of course the mantle is right under the shell. If we look at the clam, very similar. It has a foot. The foot is this tongue-shaped organ here that it uses for digging. Clams are actually really good diggers. They are really good at digging through the sand and the mud to bury themselves. And the siphons over here, which are commonly referred to as necks, they're not actually necks because clams don't have heads, but they are used to suck in water for filter feeding. Again, they'd have visceral mass with other major organs, gills, digestive system, all that good stuff, heart, and then of course a shell. You've all seen clam shells, and the mantle would be this like layer of skin-like tissue right underneath the shell. As far as the squid goes, looks quite a bit different. The foot has sort of evolved to become these arms and these tentacles. The mantle makes up a good portion of and sort of encloses everything. Of course, inside We have the lungs and the gonads and the digestive organs. And the mantle is sort of increased as the shell has decreased. And so the shell is virtually non-existent. It's this, you'd see it in the squid dissection. It's this kind of, it's called the pen, and it looks almost like a small piece of clear plastic, but it's really sort of what's left over from the shell. So in this case, the mantle has sort of taken over and become much larger, and the cell has become almost non-existent. Now, as you would imagine with all these different sort of shapes, they have different methods or modes of feeding. Snails and slugs, which you've seen before, they have a flexible tongue-like structure called the radula, and they did a really good job in the movie of showing you it's got hundreds of these teeth-like structures attached to it, and it acts almost like a chainsaw. They can kind of just scrape away at plants or algae that's on rocks, and they can eat it that way. Octopi and squid have sharp, beak-like jaws they use for, tearing apart and eating their prey. Many of the bivalves, like clams and oysters and scallops, are filter feeders. And again, they will take in water through their siphon. So here in this picture we have an in-current siphon and an ex-current siphon. So it will suck in seawater through these, filter it out, and then it will expel it through these siphons. So here's some, geoduck clams. These are some clams that are found in Washington State, and as you can see, the siphons are really big and really obvious. And these clams can actually, burrow in the sand 2 or 3 feet down, and they will extend these siphons out so that they're just above the sand, and when they're covered with water, again, they will suck in. You can see it's got 2 openings, one here, one here. So they'll suck in water through one, filter it out, and then expel it through the other. Here's the beak from an octopus or a squid. So if you were to turn it on the side, you would see it looks kind of like a bird beak. It's shaped very much like a bird beak. It is made up of more sort of flexible material, but still it's very sharp, and it can easily tear apart prey. Here we see a close-up of the radula of a snail that looks like it's eating algae off the glass here. So again, it uses this almost like sandpapery covered tongue to kind of scrape away at algae on the glass. And again, if we were in school, you could very easily see that, although our snails are quite tiny, but you can definitely see them feeding with the radula. As far as reproduction goes, the snails and the mollusks that have 2 shells have separate sexes, and they reproduce by external fertilization. So they, of course, live in water. Most of them live in the ocean, and they would just simply release, millions of eggs and sperm into the water and hope that they found each other and would, fertilize each other. The tentacled mollusks, so things like octopi and squid, and some snails that live on land, would have internal fertilization. So what happens with squid and octopi is the male will actually put their sperm in what's called a sperm packet, and then he'll use one of his arms to simply hand it to the female. She'll bring it into her body, and she could actually keep it in her body for long periods of time, weeks or even months, until she's ready to fertilize her eggs, when it's convenient for her, and then she will use that sperm to fertilize her eggs. Some of the land mollusks, like snails, are hermaphroditic, so we've already seen that with the annelids or the segmented worms, and that is to say that each animal has both male and female parts. So again, like the earthworms, they can fertilize one another's eggs. So here we see some snails that look like they're in the process of mating. Here we can see some eggs that have been laid down here. So these are land snails. Okay, as far as circulation and respiration is a little bit more complicated. We see 2 different types of circulatory systems in the mollusks. The first is a closed circulatory system where the blood travels in blood vessels, just like humans. So not really anything special there. but they also have what's called an open circulatory system. This is a little bit harder to understand, but what happens is the blood goes away from the heart in blood vessels, but then returns back to the heart through these areas called sinuses. Now, you've probably heard this term before, sinuses. And in humans, it refers to the space in your skull kind of behind your nose. Sort of this empty space where the air goes in, and that's where smelling takes place. Right now, my sinuses are not well. I have allergies because it's spring. But so in the case of the mollusks, the sinuses are referring to this kind of empty space. So here you see in this diagram, the blood goes to the gills where it picks up oxygen. It then travels to the heart. It gets pumped through blood vessels. Once it goes through different parts of the body, it will then return back to the sinus or the hemocoel. So this kind of like empty space where it will then get picked up by the gills, or in many cases, the heart again. In many cases, the heart will actually have little tiny holes in it that will enable the blood to travel from the sinus back into the heart. So not the most effective system, but again, if you're a clam, you're probably, it works well enough, because you're not going to be moving around a whole lot. You're not going to be using a lot of energy and a lot of oxygen. So again, not the best system, but it works. It's good enough for them. As far as respiration or breathing goes, of course, most of these guys live in the water, so they'll have some form of gill. But there are some land mollusks, such as snails and slugs, and they would have a primitive lung that would be found in the mantle cavity that they would use for breathing. The nervous system, again, a wide range from the very simple to the very, very complex. So most of the mollusks, like this guy here, would have a very simple nervous system with small ganglia and a few nerve cords. So again, maybe a little bit more sophisticated than our annelids or the earthworms, but not incredibly so, just a little bit. They would have simple sense organs. In the case of this bivalve here, this is a scallop actually. You've probably eaten scallops before. And these little black things you're seeing here are actually eyes, so they can use these to sense sort of light and dark. So again, not super sophisticated, but if you're a clam or a scallop, it's good enough. Now the octopi and the squid are a different story. These guys are very active predators, right? They move around very quickly, and they are very smart. These guys are considered to have the most developed nervous system of all the invertebrates. And you saw in the video that of how the octopi and many of the squid are able to change their colors, and so this requires a very sophisticated nervous system. They say that an octopus is as smart as a dog, so they're very good at problem solving. Here in this picture, at this point, if we were in school, I would show you lots and lots of videos, but it's not really practical here. But here you see this is a common test where they give an octopus a jar, like a mason jar or a pickle jar, and it'll put its favorite food in there, and it may take the octopus 30 or 45 seconds, but they very quickly figure out that they got to take the lid off the jar to get at the food. So really smart. And of course, with their strong tentacles with suction cups, they're able to manipulate things in ways that a dog perhaps would not be able to do. Excretion. So in other words, how to get rid of nitrogenous waste, right? Nitrogen containing waste that results from breaking down proteins. Well, again, like the earthworms and their relatives, they have a nephridia or a protokidney to do that filters out their blood. And of course, any solid waste will just pass out through the anus. As far as movement goes, again, they're going to use this foot. So this foot can take many forms. So it can be the tentacles of an octopi or squid. It can be the hatchet foot that we see in clams. So here is the foot right here. Again, they use this for digging through the sand and the mud on the ocean bottom. And of course, you all have seen the sort of snail foot, that little thing on the bottom that enables them to move along using that wave type muscular motion. So here we see a snail actually attached to a piece of glass, and this bottom area here, this is the foot. So that's what it uses for moving around. Okay, so let's talk about the major groups of mollusks. So the first one would be class Gastropoda. And Gastropoda, the gastro refers to stomach, and the pod or poda refers to foot. So these are the stomach foot mollusks. So these can be shell-less, as we see with slugs, or they can be a single-shelled mollusk like we see with snails. And of course, they move by using this muscular foot that's on the ventral side. So the ventral meaning the belly side. This would be the dorsal side, or the back, ventral or the stomach side. And of course, as you know, many snails and their relatives, they can withdraw into their shells for protection. Although not all the gastropods have shells. So slugs, for example, which are for some reason more common in this area than actual snails. I see them all the time, whereas snails not as much. They don't have a shell to protect them. They do. Land snails and slugs often produce copious amounts of mucus to cover their bodies and to help them to keep moist and to keep from drying out. Because if they dry out, they'll die. So you've probably seen people put salt on slugs, and that kills them because essentially it just draws the water out of their bodies and they die from dehydration. Nudibranchs are these very colorful slug-like creatures that live in the ocean. So if we look inside the sort of body of a snail, the body of the snail actually follows the twisting motion of the shell. So that's called torsion. Here you see the digestive system. Here's the heart. Here's the gills, and here's the anus. So notice one sort of unusual thing about snails is because of this torsion, this twisting of the body inside the shell, what ends up happening is the anus kind of ends up near the head. So this is kind of unusual. Most animals, of course, the anus is on the backside. They can do their thing. They can eject waste products and sort of move forward, and it's gone. But snails, not so much. It kind of lands on or near their head. So that's kind of unusual. Here's a banana slug, aptly named. I believe these are from South America, I believe. Actually, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, disregard what I just said. I don't know where these are found. But anyways, really brightly colored. You see this hole here. This hole is actually a hole into their mantle, and this is actually through which they breathe. So gases are able to kind of go inside. Again, you can see it's very shiny, covered in mucus to protect it, keep it from drying out. These are nudibranchs. So again, these live in the ocean. They're often very, colorful, and they have these sort of branching areas on their bodies, on the dorsal surfaces, and you can use these for, respiration. The bright colors often indicate that they are poisonous. So that's a warning to other animals not to eat them. All right, the second group is class Bivalvia, and bi, of course, means two, and valve refers to the shells. All of these have two shells. Now, they're held together by these powerful adductor muscles. So these adductor muscles, are the best way to describe them is they're these sort of short, barrel-shaped muscles, and they help to keep the two shells or valves together. And if you ever try to open a clam or a mussel or something like that that's alive, it's very difficult to do without breaking the shell. These muscles are very, very strong. And to get a better idea of what they look like, if you've eaten scallops before, what you're actually eating is the adductor muscles. Now, some examples of bivalves, of course, would be clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops. So these are more sedentary animals, which is to say they don't really move around a whole lot. They tend to stay in one place. So they tend to either burrow in the sand, or in the case of these blue mussels here, they'll actually attach themselves to rocks with these very strong thread-like structures. And yeah, so they don't really go anywhere. Scallops, here's a scallop right here. They can actually kind of swim by kind of flapping their shells together, so they can kind of swim very clumsily, but they can kind of move around that way. We're not going to get really into the clam anatomy. If we were in school, we would actually dissect clams. But I just want to point out a few quick things. So here's the adductor muscles we were talking about that hold the two shells together. Here's the gills. So the gills are used for breathing, also used for feeding. They actually help to filter out the water. Here's that tongue-like structure. That is the foot. And then you can see here's the heart. Here's the heart right here, and also the sinuses around the heart. This is the digestive system here, right? There's the anus. Actually, sorry, that's the mouth, not the anus. You can see the nerve in yellow, the nerve cords here. So the mouth is actually right here. So they don't really have a head per se, so they've kind of lost that head, don't need it. Most of these have internal shells, like we saw with the squid, or they have no shell at all. The exception would be the nautilus. The nautilus does have quite a big shell. You can see it here, and here's the eye, and here are the tentacles. What's hard to see is that the animal is actually only living in this part of the shell, and the rest of the shell is pretty much empty, but it's filled with air. It's filled with gases that help it to float and make it more buoyant. But for the most part, the cephalopods have lost their shell through millions of years of evolution, so they can move much faster. The foot is divided into tentacles or arms, and of course, in the case of the octopus, they have these suction discs. In the case of squid, many of them have these suction / teeth-like structures that help them to grab their prey. And you can actually see, we actually know that these giant squid exist because we can see the scars left behind on the sperm whales that eat them, and you can see that many of the scars are caused by the teeth from the suckers. And so we can actually, biologists can actually determine the size of the squid based on these sucker scars that are left on the heads of these whales. Here is the shell of a nautilus from the outside. Here's the shell from the inside. So they've kind of sliced it in half. And so again, the animal would be living in this sort of outer, bigger section here. But you can see these other sections where it used to live as it was growing and getting bigger. These are now filled with gases, and this air is what helps it to float. Here's the tiniest mollusk, the blue dragon. Looks like it is some kind of nudibranch that lives in the ocean. All right, so I hope that was helpful. So just answer the questions, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. There are tons of really cool videos on YouTube. So if you have any questions, or you want to just check out things like giant squid or scallops moving, I highly recommend it. Also, if you have time, check out some quick videos on YouTube that involve the octopi, because they're pretty amazing. Their color changing ability is absolutely phenomenal, and their intelligence. If you just type in intelligence octopus, you'll see all kinds of crazy video clips on YouTube. All right, so I hope this was helpful.